Okay, so once again I've taken the easier path and we're going to be doing the horse skirmishes now because I'm really delaying having to test all the archers because it's going to take quite a while. But the horse archers, there are actually 10 of them now, and there are some new interesting additions. There are also some returning units, so there are 10, well there are 12 in total, so only 2 didn't make it onto the list, but we'll start at the bottom at number 10 and work our way up. So at number 10 we have the Eored Horsearchers. They have 9 attack, 14 defense and 9 charge. There are 76 men in the unit under normal circumstances, and they do 11 missile damage. They don't have hit points. They are very similar to the 2 that didn't make it onto the list. They are the Harad Raiders and the Veriag Raiders, only the real difference between them is that the Eored Horsearchers have excellent stamina as opposed to just good stamina. And they can also form shooting circle and have good armor. It's a pretty decent all-round unit, honestly, and it used to be the case that the Eored Horse Archers were very cheap in the original, a cheap horse skirmisher. And again, for low funds games, the Eored Horse Archers are still a pretty good option, but ultimately I would say that only really the higher tier horse archers are going to be useful most of the time with the funds people are given. So, the Iron Horse Archers still a decent, cheaper unit, but still outclassed by a lot of those that are above it. So now we'll move on to number 9. And at number 9 we have the Riders of the Fold, sticking with Rohan. They have 12 attack, 21 defense and 9 charge. Again, they have 76 men in the unit under normal circumstances. They do 12 missile damage, they perform shooting circle, and they have good armor and good stamina. The Riders of the Fold aren't quite as expensive anymore, which is good, but they still kind of disappoint me. Rohan should have a good horse archer, I feel, because really their cavalry is what they depend upon. And they do have a better skirmisher on this list, but the Riders of the Fold are the best bow skirmisher that they have, and they still end up being very lackluster. They have lower stamina than the Eored Horse Archers. The only reason they're above them is the slightly higher missile damage and the notably higher defense. But other than that, the Riders of the Fold still end up being far outclassed by a lot of the other horse skirmishers on this list, which is a bit of a shame considering they're meant to be a high tier unit. I think that's the intention of these guys, at least it was in vanilla. Maybe things have changed now, and they're intended to be just like a sort of fairly low tier horse skirmisher, but still, the Riders of the Fold, I think they should be a little bit stronger. But it is what it is. They're still a viable option if you want to use horse skirmishers, because they can take a hit better than the Eored Horse Archers at the very least. But now we'll move on to number 8. So at number 8 we have the Veriag Horse Archers of Rune, and they have 13 attack, 22 defense, and 12 charge. That's a pretty nasty amount of charge for a horse archer. Under normal circumstances, they will have 61 men in the unit. They only do 11 missile damage as opposed to the 12 the Riders of the Fold can dish out. But they have significantly more bonuses. For example, they are good versus cavalry and in deserts. They can also form shooting circle, and they have excellent armor and stamina. So they are significantly better at taking hits, and they are good versus cavalry. This is a very good stat to have as a horse archer, as being hunted down by cavalry is usually a bit of a weakness that they have, but the Veriag horse archers counteract this somewhat. They are stuck in this strange blob formation, which is similar to how the Berserkers of Isengard are deployed, but nonetheless, they still do their job. With horse archers it's a little less important because you will be out of melee for the vast majority of the time, only really committing to melee later on, provided that you have survived your ordeals. A very nice unit, the best horse skirmisher that Rune have on this list, and they can potentially be used to devastating effect because of that good versus cavalry trait, and it's something which will come up again and again on this list really. The only ones that can really outperform this are those that have extremely high missile damage. But yeah, Veriag Horse Archers, an intriguing unit, very nice looking unit as well, and a nice addition to Rune I feel. So at number 7 we have the Dunedain Scouts of Arnor. 14 attack, 21 defense, and 11 charge. They have 50 men in the unit under normal circumstances. They do 12 missile damage. They are good at hiding in the woods. They are also good versus cavalry, and they have good armor and stamina. It was a very close run thing between them and the Veriag Horse Archers, but I figured that the Good versus cavalry was the really important trait that both of them had, and the thing that separated them was the Dunedain scouts have slightly more missile damage, so they're slightly better at range. In melee, the Veriag Horsearchers will be slightly better, but the ranged contingent is what the Horsearchers are really all about. The melee damage you can get done afterwards is really a bonus. And it can be used for clutch victories, but the Dunedain scouts, I feel, are slightly better. They also give Arnor more ranged punch, which seems to be more of Arnor's focus in this submod, to be honest with you, with all of their very good archers. They're not so much about their heavily armoured, strong units anymore. They're a little bit more versatile. And the Dunedain scouts are another nice option for this, particularly because Arnor have got the cavalry to cover them. Whereas Rune's cavalry is perhaps a little bit more expensive in terms of the Brotherhood of the Lance and the Innes Rim. But yeah, the Dunedain Scout's a nice option for Arnor, but now we shall move on to number 6. So I figured that the middle of the list was a good place to put the Javelins, as they are potentially more damaging, but are significantly more difficult to micro with how close you have to get. So we'll start off with the Murad Beastmasters here at number 6, and they have 11 attack, 17 defense, and 9 charge. 61 men in the unit under normal circumstances, and they deal 14 missile damage, which is the highest we've seen so far. They can form shooting circle, they're good versus armor, as most javelins are. They have good stamina, but of course the thing that I mentioned before in the vanilla variants of these is that the Murad Beastmasters are camels and therefore scare horses. So in addition to being good versus armor, they will scare enemy cavalry, and this is a potentially useful tool, particularly against cavalry-heavy factions like Rohan, because it means that you can potentially cause a mass rout with less effort. And the Murad Beastmasters will also be able to deal decent damage against them, because most cavalry has got heavy armor, and this is good versus armor. The Beastmasters are pretty vulnerable to arrows, I've noticed, and they're also pretty slow. In terms of speed, they're about the same as wargs, which is not as good as horsebound units. So yeah, the Murad Beastmasters, a difficult unit to use correctly, I've noticed. I've wasted them a few times. I've also used them to good effect. One of those temperamental units, potentially very, very good, potentially kind of a waste. But the Murad Beastmasters are still very unique in that they're camels. There's no other camel unit. But they find themselves in the middle with the rest of the javelins. And with that, we'll move on to number 5. So in the middle of the list we have Rohan's Riddermark Skirmishers, the highest they've placed on this list. With 16 attack, 20 defense, and 9 charge, they're a little bit more beefy than the Murad Beastmasters. They only have 52... No, sorry, that's wrong. They have 76 men in the unit under normal circumstances. And they do 15 missile damage. They are good versus cavalry, they can form shooting circle, and they have good armor and stamina. This is actually a potentially very useful unit for Rohan because of its effectiveness against cavalry. I'd be very tempted to hide a unit of these guys within my melee cavalry, like my Royal Lords and my Royal Guard. And then when all the enemy cavalry is engaged, I would use these guys to tip the balance of the fight very far in my favour. That's what these guys are for, I believe. The only danger is they can be caught by enemy cavalry, and they're obviously not going to stand a chance in melee against most forms of heavy shock cavalry or melee cavalry. But if you can get these guys into the right position, they will be able to do a ton of damage to enemy cav. And if you can win the cav fight convincingly as Rohan, then you can go around and decimate your enemy's lines with it, and that could be all important. Certainly it's what Rohan depend upon. The introduction of the Royal Lords do make Rohan a very viable faction, I feel. All on its own, that unit has managed to do that, but the Riddermark Skirmishers are a very nice tool in order to use your cavalry to its full potential, I feel. Just a little bit difficult to micro as with most javelin cavalry, as I've said before. But now we'll move on to the best of the javelins. So the wargs finally make an appearance on one of these, and the warg skirmishers have 11 attack, 17 defense, and 12 charge. Again, a decent amount of charge there. 76 goblins in the unit under normal circumstances. And they have 16 missile damage, which is the highest you'll see on this list, and they also have 2 hit points. They're good versus cavalry, cause fear, good armor, excellent stamina, all of that. They're a very good unit, potentially, if you use them correctly. The only problem is, of course, that issue of micro. They're decent in melee, though, because of that 2 hit points. They're more difficult to kill off, both at range and in melee compared to the other two skirmishers, which is certainly what pushes them this high, and of course that extra missile damage is very nice. Very good anti-cavalry unit. The only problem is they don't really have any amazing cavalry, at least, well, most of the orcs rely on their wargs. And they're not really going to have the advantage in terms of the cav fight. The wargs are potentially good anti-cavalry units, the melee versions, but usually the really good ones are expensive. And the warg skirmishers, you know, they can help tip this fight, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult than the Rohan. They are more effective overall, which is why I gave them the number 4 spot. Yeah, the warg skirmishers, very interesting unit, potentially very deadly, but ultimately I decided that the 3 best Horsearchers should be numbers 1 through 3, and that is subjective because none of them do as much damage as the Jaguar. None of them do as much damage as this particular unit, but I think that if you use them to their ranged capabilities, the 3 Horsearchers that are ahead are best. So we'll now move on to number 3. So at number 3 we have the Imladris Riders of the High Elves. They have 14 attack, 20 defense and 11 charge, 52 men in the unit under normal circumstances, 13 missile damage, but of course they are bows, so this will be significantly further away, and they can form shooting circle, good armor and stamina and all that. They're not... They are still very effective, but ultimately you're not going to see these guys a lot for the same reason you're not going to see them a lot in vanilla, namely that the High Elves will more likely spend all of their budget in terms of cavalry on their melee cav, and then some on their infantry. And Horsearchers are going to be pretty low down on their priority list, but they are potentially very, very good if you ever see them. Maybe you could say that, you know, the high missile base damage is not enough to make up for the fact that they're not good versus cavalry, like the Beriag Horsearchers and the Dunedain Scouts. But I feel as though that if you use the Horsearchers well, and that if you're good with your micro in terms of taking out enemy infantry and making sure that the gap in terms of numbers between you and any other faction of playing as the High Elves is equalized a little bit, that'll be what the Imladris Riders are good for, and that is why I've put them this high on the list. Again, that's pretty subjective, because they can be beaten by units that are below them on this list 1v1, but for the function of Horsearchers, I do think these guys are this good. But now we'll move on to number 2. The Silvan Elves find themselves once again at number 2 on this particular list, but the Elder Reavers are actually better than the Silvan Horsearchers by virtue of a few things. They have 13 attack, 20 defense and 12 charge, so a very high charge. Also 61 men in the unit, 13 missile damage, shooting circle, good armor and stamina. And really the high charge and slightly more men in the unit is what puts them ahead of the Imladris Riders. So, you know, the Silvan Elves have got a pretty decent cav contingent, honestly, if a little expensive, and their archers are something they rely on heavily, and their mounted archers are no exception to this. They will be using them a lot more often than the High Elves will be using their Imladris Riders, I feel. Potentially very damaging, you know, again for the same reasons as the Imladris Riders, they're up here only, you know, with more men and more charge. That is why they are here. They have one less score in attack, but honestly that's not too important. If you're in sustained melee with these guys, you're doing something wrong. So yeah, the Elder Reavers, and they are beaten by who is at number 1, and the number 1 spot was always going to be rather obvious really when you think about it. Eriador and the Grey Company find themselves at number 1 again, with 13 attack, 21 defense and 11 charge. They have 48 men in the unit under normal circumstances, 14 missile damage, 2 hit points, which is one of the big reasons for this. They're good versus armor, good armor and excellent stamina. And they're really the quintessential Horsearcher. Eriador always had this as one of their, well, in vanilla it is really the only reason you would want to play Eriador in any competitive sense. Now though, Eriador do have other options, but the Grey Company is still one of their real aces in the pack, and being much more durable than any other unit, because the Wargs still manage to be a little bit fragile even with that hit point. The Grey Company managing to be the most durable on this list, in addition to being potentially the most damaging from range. You know, the Grey Company were always going to be number 1 really. When I saw all of the candidates, I expected the Grey Company to head the list, and it turned out that they did indeed clinch the number 1 spot once again. So, the Grey Company, one of the prides of Eriador. So that was the Horsearchers, and I am now left with just archers, cheap infantry, and cheap cavalry. Those are the only 3 that I have left. I have been thinking about trying something else, and it did come to my attention recently that Total War Warhammer did receive mod tools for maps, and really the reason that I didn't get Warhammer in the first place was it seemed like simple field battles were really the only thing going for it in terms of multiplayer. The siege battles seemed to be, well, crap, to be brutal. But now it looks like that's all about to change, and I was thinking of getting that, and if that's something that people would want to see, then I would be more likely to buy it. So, let me know what you think of that idea. Of course, I will continue to do Reforged, and Third Age in general continuously, because that is, really what I've been doing for the most part in the past couple of months. But if Warhammer is something people would want to see in addition to that, then do let me know. But I hope I see you for the next video, which I promise will be the Archers.